Okay, I think we still have to move on. Okay, and welcome back to this module, GEE5414. Okay, we are now in your second week, and before we move on, I would like to take a note of this video with you all together. I believe we haven't seen this before. This is a reminder regarding all of the three major theories. We have reviewed the three selected sociological theories in week one. And today we will go through these ideas one by one. But before that, we may have to get a bird view of these theories, okay? Just wait for a while.
I know all these social theories can seem pretty daunting, but they're actually fairly simple to keep track of if you remember the main points. The first theory of society that I'll review is functionalism. This theory looks at how a society can exist and survive over time. Basically, functionalism states that a society is always trying to come to an equilibrium, trying to stabilize. The structures that make up a society, like institutions, will remain pretty constant and only change if absolutely necessary when the society loses stability. Remember that institutions are structures that fulfill the needs of society. There's an example of that in our society right now. The business institution has had to adapt to the huge online shopping boom. As online retail providers like Amazon draw more and more people away from retail stores down the street, those stores have to find ways to attract people again so they will take the time to stop in and shop. But it takes a lot of energy to change, so the stores will only do what is absolutely necessary to get customers again. Right, so when you think of functionalism, think of the minor changes an institution makes to find a stable balance in the society. Only change to be functional again. The next theory is conflict theory, which is just like it sounds. It focuses on how societies change and adapt over time through conflict. In any society, there is going to be conflicting viewpoints and beliefs, and people are going to take sides. Eventually, this is going to polarize the society where one group is happy with the status quo and another group wants change. This is a very fragile state for the society, and eventually both sides will have to come to some sort of agreement or else tear the society apart. The class struggle in 19th century Europe is an example of this process. The workers wanted change while the factory owners were happy with the way things were. The two opposing positions were merged to create a new society where the workers had slightly more power than before and the factory owners had slightly less, and everyone was content, if maybe not ecstatic about the outcome. Okay, so in conflict theory, you have two opposing sides at odds with each other that eventually lead to the creation of a new synthesized society. Conflict creating a new society. Next, we have the theory of social constructionism, which looks at what a society is, rather than how it exists or changes. In social constructionism, everything is created from the minds of the society. There's an agreement that something has meaning and value that the thing doesn't actually have intrinsically. One of the most prevalent examples today is money. It has no value on its own. It's just paper or metal or numbers in a computer. But as a society, we have agreed to give it a specific value, and that agreement actually helps to shape the society itself. So when you think of social constructionism, remember that everything only has value because we agree it has value. We construct the world around us. The final social theory here is symbolic interactionism. This one is kind of different than the other theories because it puts a lot of focus on the individual and how they behave. It is based around the idea of the meanings we give to things. Like, to me, a tree could be a source of shade, whereas for someone else, it could be the home to spiders and ants. People are created by their society. They act based on their past experiences in their lives and the meanings they have given things. But not everyone gives the same meaning to everything. That tree could mean 10 different things to 10 different people. And even if you just look at one person, a tree can have multiple meanings, and those meanings can even change over time. The meanings we give things is based on our past experiences in society, and those meanings and our interpretations create our future society. To put it in a phrase, symbolic interactionism says that we interact with the world to give it meaning. So to sum up this summary, we have functionalism, looking at the stability of the society, conflict theory, looking at how the society changes, social constructionism, discovering how things are given value, and finally, symbolic interactionism, learning how individuals act.
Okay. Wait. Okay, here we are. We have just reviewed the three different sociological theories altogether. When we talk about the three synthetic theories, to a larger extent, we can try to make a connection with our daily practice. For example, when we talk about the function, when we talk about the functional approach, okay, we can view our societies as a whole, and then we can separate different sectors, organization, to the so-called social agent or social institution. You can imagine when we talk about university, when we talk about hospital, when we talk about a particular department of our government, all of them can be regarded as the so-called social agents. They do have their function and their role. And the most important point is that we can make a connection of these social agents. And we also can separate them and to view them as an individual unit. So the point is that when we talk about the function, the functional approach of our society, we want to find a connection among these different agents. And then we also want to take a look of their features and natures. Once we can have a fully understanding of their functions and their natures, consequently, we know that whether they have done their job or whether they do have certain space for them to improve, something like that. But remember that when we talk about social agents, it doesn't mean that we only can view it as the one and the only one unit. Very often, when we take a look of an individual social agent, we also can distinguish quite a number of different departments, sectors among these social agents, and they do have particular roles. For example, when we talk about police service department, and actually you know that we do have police block unit. which means that the police lot are all well trained. They would go to search drug, medicine, alcohol at the night for the frontline officer. But of course, we also can have the other action units within police service department. For example, we have SDU, Special Duty Unit. We have National Security Unit. We also have Traffic Unit and the like. But remember that when we talk about this, the title, the so-called typical title of these theories may not be the same at all. When you go to take a note of the reference or some external resources, somehow, no matter how, they may have used very similar terms. For example, when we talk about functionalism, some people would talk about structural functionalism. It doesn't matter. The point is that you have to make all of these ideas in your paper at the so-called to make them become a coherent practice, okay? And then when we talk about the other one, okay, the other one is conflict theory. We have just mentioned that. When we talk about conflict theory, okay, actually, this is about the contradiction among different social groups. Very often, we will use social economic status as the foundation to talk about the core elements for us to distinguish different people and different social groups. And we also have symbolic approach. Symbolic approach means that we can go to take a look of some practice, appearance, forms, outlooks, and then based on the differences of these elements, we can go to make some guess, we can go to make some further analysis by our observation. For example, we have just mentioned social groups, castes, we have just mentioned different social castes, we have just mentioned conflict theory. So imagine our society has been divided to different social castes. We do have lower castes, we do have middle castes, and we do have upper castes. When we talk about the differences of these social castes, we can identify some of the major features or natures. Okay, for example, it seems that most of the working class, they may have to focus on some very routine nature job. And when we talk about middle class, they often refer to those people who work from 9 to 5, or maybe now when we talk about the standard working hour, they often have to work between 9 and 7, something like that. When we talk about the upper caste, they do have their own features. For example, they may often travel around, traveling here and there. So the point is that when we talk about symbolic approach, which means that we attempt to focus on some differences by our observation to distinguish something from some people, from some social groups. You may still remember that in week 1, we had a very brief quiz by Mentimeter. And then according to the result of our mini quiz. It seems that quite a number of people would like to make a connection between sociology and connection and interaction relationship. To not understand this is the very reflective way out for us to talk about sociology, because whenever we talk about sociology, actually, to not understand sociology allows you and me to, based on certain actions and reaction among the general public, to make some choice, to make some analysis. But remember that when we talk about the analysis, to not understand all of this analysis to make sense, which means that when we talk about our observation, we do not just talk about by some heuristic, by some very casual estimation. We would go to separate all of these findings by our understanding with a logical analysis, which means that when we go to talk about the differences among different social groups, as we mentioned, we will not just go to talk about some very casual assumption. We would go to make further analysis. We would go to collect and go to distinguish certain factors. By these ideas, we then go to identify the reason, the rationale behind the differences. Okay. When we talk about the core idea of sociology, actually remember that just similar to the commonly agreed boundary of academic term, very often a particular term can mean something to different people, which means that when we talk about the core idea of sociology, for quite a number of people, they often have their own perspective towards the definition. For example, when we talk about the core idea of sociology, some people thought that this is about the relations and this is about the connection among different institutions. So you may still remember we have just mentioned the terms in here, social agent and social institution. So remember that very often quite a number of the terms in sociology are interchangeable. So the point is that, once again, try to stick with this term in a coherent approach, okay? And when we talk about the core ideas of sociology, and actually, the left-hand side, this diagram may give you some further ideas. When we talk about sociology, actually, that is not only about ourselves. We also have to make connection between ourselves and the other social agents. Consequently, some people will go to make further analysis and try to connect all of these factors all together. Because when they can join these factors all together, they can find out some new ideas. And by these new findings, they often can go to do something to move forward, to make changes for our society. For example, when we talk about sociology, some people would focus on to the notion of schooling, because it seems to us that when we talk about schooling, that is a very important element for us to talk about the betterment and the enrichment of our personality, which means that we often received intensive training by our teachers, and we have to receive certain core ideas of our status as citizens. And we have to learn these ideas by schooling. Meanwhile, some people thought that maybe we do not have to talk about, we do not have to overwatch the role, the importance of schooling, because we may have to start with family, because to not understand family can be regarded as the essence of our life course, which means that we received and we learn most of our ideas by the embasement of family. But remember that, you may still remember in week 1 we have just mentioned, when we talk about sociology, we also have to talk about comparison. We mean that whenever we talk about sociology, we cannot just focus on the current practice. We often have to take a look of the differences between the current time and the old time. We have to pay attention to the differences of time. Of course, we also have to pay attention to the differences of regions, cultures, and the like. This is because when we talk about some ideas, some social phenomena, we may not underestimate the importance of time, differences of regions and culture. For example, when we talk about you may still remember that in week 1 we talk whether we have to put on our facial mask or not to put on our facial mask as our example. When we talk about our practice, the practice of most of the Hong Kong people, we are okay to put on our facial mask because we had a very painful experience in 2003. And then we have, at that moment, we had the emergence of SARS. And then in 2008, we had the breakout of pig flu, okay? And so we have experience to protect ourselves by putting on the facial mask. But when we talk about the practice of the other regions, like the United States, the United Kingdom, most of the European regions, you may have already heard the practice by newspaper, by TV programs. Most of the citizens, quite a number of the citizens of these regions, of these countries, or even the so-called international global cities are not very likely, do not like to put on their facial mask. The reason is that we have to talk about the differences of culture. We have to pay attention to the cultural differences. Okay, so you can imagine that maybe you can go to take a look of the reasons behind this practice. Why do some people, they do not want to put on their facial mask, even though we have a very solid evidence from different organizations like WHO. Most of the people do not like to put on their facial mask because they want to talk about the freedom of choice. They want to talk about the freedom of speech. They want to talk about their freedom, personal rights, and the like. So you can see that they may know this issue can be regarded as a very serious issue among different social groups, among different countries, but they still want to visit people on their mask because we cannot underestimate the importance of culture and historical consideration. Okay. So when we talk about the core idea of sociology, some people focus on to the importance of gender. Some people talk about race experience. Obviously, when we take a look of these items, okay, we can estimate that to a large extent, the supporters of these ideas maybe or should be come from certain controversial cities, for example, New York, London, Manhattan, and the like. This is because in their daily practice, they often have to face with the difficulties of these issues all day, every day. For example, we now have a very clear understanding to the notion of BLM, Black Lives Matter. Okay, we know that when most of the people in the USA, in the big city like New York, Seattle, and the like, quite a number of people have to face discrimination all day, every day. So in the middle of this diagram, we can take, you may have already found a term in here, the so-called stigma, okay, stigma. Why do we have to focus on stigma? Because to not understand when we talk about stigma, actually can be regarded as one of the major forcing factor for us to have the emergence of discrimination and the controversial non-standing topics of race issues and gender issues. Because very often we cannot run away with our non-standing mindset, mentality, okay? In the past, when we talk about the importance stages between the two genders, okay? And actually, you may have no idea. But when we talk about the so-called gender right, when we talk about the female right, we may have to get back to about 5 or 6 decades ago. At that moment, the ladies from the USA start to have the right to give their vote in election. But you may wonder, when we talk about the USA, when we talk about the UK or most of the European unions, they have mentioned about the values, the universal norms, N-O-R-M, the norms, the common core values among their citizens for centuries, okay? In the past few centuries, they often talk about human rights. They often talk about the freedom of choice. Then why do so many regions, especially when we talk about the situation in the USA, did not give the female citizen had the right to give a vote in election? Can you try to think about that? Can you make a guess? Maybe we can use about a couple of minutes to think about it, okay? Think about this. Why do so many countries did not give the right to the female citizens to vote for their candidates in the election? Then why do the USA, for example, start to give this right to the female citizen in decades ago? Okay, suppose you all are very sleepy after a long day work, and we can think about the history. We can think about the background, okay? When we talk about the USA, when we talk about the core value of USA, often talk about freedom, often talk about right, okay? Declaration of Independence. But only up to about seven decades ago, only up to about 7 decades ago, start to release such an important right to the female citizen, because the sociological background. At that moment, most of the gentlemen had to join World War I, World War II. I suppose you still remember that. When you make connection with the Marvel movie, okay, Captain America, then you may know the background of this issue, okay. When you take note of the story of Captain America, then you may still remember that at that moment, quite a number of the citizens have to leave the USA and then to join a long battle in Europe. Okay, so you can see that sometimes when we talk about sociological approach, we start to focus on certain phenomena, and then by this practice, we go to take out the reason behind. Okay. Anyway, I would like to have a very brief review regarding the core ideas of this module. Okay. We suppose you can have a very clear understanding regarding some core ideas of theoretical perspectives. Right from the beginning, the movie had give you some ideas of that. In the coming sessions, we will have 3 more very brief video clips regarding the core idea of the three mentioned theories. You don't have to worry about the theories because to a large extent, the theory would occupy certain proportion of your essays, okay? I think your essay should be regarded as the most concerned areas in your mind. In your essay, do not have to spend the whole 1,200 words for these theories. Very often, people focus. You may only use around 1/3 of the works to interpret the idea of these theories. But the point is that you have a fundamental understanding of this theory, and then you have to make comparisons of this theory, okay? And in fact, you also have to rely on this foundation to raise a question and then to link up with the application, which means that you have to tell me, you have to convince your reader, your marker, that you have a fundamental understanding of these theories. And then this theory allows you to raise some question. And this question can make a connection with some practical problems, situation of our society, okay? But consequently, you may have to convince your reader that you can have a comparison to evaluate the effectiveness of your discussion, okay, of your argument. Okay. So once again, you have to submit your reflective essay by week 10. I have, because I have prepared my backup notebook with me, so I would, based on that notebook, to monitoring the message box, okay? Okay, someone informs me that we have a newcomer, so I may have to follow this issue immediately. It seems that I have added you to this tutorial group, so okay. Okay. Someone tells me that he has not received any email regarding this tutorial session, right? Because I have just received a update, a very new and update class list, so maybe the system could not have sufficient time to deliver an email to you guys. Sorry about that. I believe once you have been added to this tutorial group in the coming week, before a few days ago of the coming lesson, you will be informed by email, okay? I believe because the system has not renewed and make further adjustments. Just similar to the so-called record of CSA. I am not sure whether you know it or not. Actually, for the tutor, they can use CSA, class attending system. CAS, and then would consist of all of the information and even photos of all of the participants. And actually, up to present, we have a total of 22 participants, but for my current version of the CAS, the cast photo only has 18, something like that, okay? So once again, sorry about that. Maybe we have to move on. Yes, regarding reflective essay. Okay. Regarding reflective essay, I would like to remind you again for the general regulation of plagiarism, okay? And actually, we don't have to take it so serious, not really a problem of film, but it will create certain consequence for you. So maybe you can take note of this first.
Plagiarism is something we hear about often, but do we really know what it means? You might hear the word used by your professor as part of a warning and something you should avoid. But how do you do this? Let's take a look. First, what is plagiarism? Plagiarism occurs when a writer uses someone else's language, ideas, or other original material without acknowledging its source. Whether you intend to or not, you are stealing someone else's ideas. Here's an example. You're writing a paper for your English class and you find a great quote from a book that fits perfectly into your paper.
Yay!
You copy and paste the paragraph into your paper, but you don't give credit to the source. This is plagiarism. To avoid plagiarizing or passing someone else's intellectual property off as your own, be sure to include a citation after the quote. Plagiarism can be either intentional or unintentional, so we need to look at ways to avoid being an information thief. Here are 5 easy steps to help you avoid plagiarism. Number 1, use original ideas and opinions. Write your own thoughts and explanations regarding your research topic. If you do need to use information from another source, be sure it is relevant. And if you do use it, make sure you cite it. Number 2, paraphrase. When you're using information from a source, it's a good idea to put it into your own words. However, you still need to cite the source even though you're paraphrasing. Information that is common knowledge, for example, the sky is blue, does not need to be cited. Number 3, cite your sources. As I've already said, you need to cite information that you get from a source. Whether it is from a book, journal article, blog, or website, you need to cite it. Here's an example of a citation. In the parentheses, you can see that both the publication year and page number are given. There are different ways of doing this depending on the citation style you're using. Sometimes it can be difficult to tell when a citation is needed. When in doubt, cite it. Number 4, use quotation marks. If you're putting information into your paper that you took directly from a source, be sure to put quotation marks around that information. This tells the reader that you're quoting directly from your source.
Help!
Number 5, ask for help. If you're just not sure when and how to cite your information, ask for help. There are several options available to you to get help with your citations. If you're on campus, you can visit ACE. ACE is Southeastern's Academic Center for Enrichment. You can also ask a librarian such as myself, and you can even use online tools such as Purdue OWL's website, which offers resources for both MLA and APA. You can also use Zotero. Zotero is a free tool which helps you collect, organize, and cite your sources. You can find more tutorial videos on our YouTube channel or visit us online at library.seu.edu.
You may wonder, why do I have to emphasize this issue again and again? Because we do have a very strict regulation in School of GEL, okay, School of General Education and Languages. There's a very clear message from School of GEL regarding the importance of copyright. So remember, for those who cannot submit a very reasonable originality percentage of the work, you may have to face some penalty, okay? But remember that we don't have a standardized percentage of turning in. For example, whenever you add a new reference, for example, when you have a total of 10 sources and you have add all of these 10 different sources to a reference list, everyone will count 1% because we all just focus onto the same format to write your reference, okay? So a total of 10 units of reference will contribute to a total of 10% for your similarities. The point is that you may have to take a look of the details, okay? Take a look of the breakdown. When even the number is not very significant high, for example, 15%, something like that. For some people, they maybe a whole paragraph has been highlighted by turning in, okay? Sometimes some of you even will not go to prepare a reference list, okay? So once again, you have to prepare a reference list and you have to prepare in-text citation. Remember, for those without a reference list, the final grade will be deducted for one subgrade. And for those who don't have in-text citation, the final grade would be deducted another subgrade. Furthermore, you may have to pay attention to the requirement of work limit, okay? Sorry, please wait me for a while. I would like to open the handout for you. Okay. Remember that when we talk about your preparation for your reflective essay, once again, we have to submit it by week 10, and then you have to pay attention to the work limits, okay? You have to pay attention to the work limit. Oh. To begin with, you have to pay attention to the number of questions. Very often, somehow, no matter how we encounter quite a number of people submit all of the 3 questions altogether. Not a good practice and not necessary. You only have to pick any one question from the 3 questions provided, okay? And especially, please remember, pay attention to the requirement for the works. You only can write about 1,200 words, okay? You can imagine when you go to submit your essay with 2,000 words. Meanwhile, the other people, the other participants can submit their essays around 1,200 words, but you submit your essay by 2,000 words. Even we talk about even the standard of the 2 paper or the two sides are very similar, but still you have spent much more work, about 60%, much more than the rest, then your grade would be affected effectively, very significantly, okay? Which means that you can imagine when your classmate submit a 1,200 words essay, okay? And you submit a 2,000 words essay. Consequently, maybe a B+ paper, a B+ essay would be deducted to C+. Okay, so remember that this is also your effort and preparation for your reflective essay. Because you have to understand how to organize your work, you have to understand how to find a good structure to present your idea. You have to make your choice to collect resources and then to consolidate these resources. You may have collected a total of 10 different perspectives for you to enrich your arguments, but maybe only 3 of them are workable for your flow, for your logic, for your argument. So this is your preparation. So when you go to collect quite a number of different perspectives or resources to support you, consequently, you write much more than the other participants. Then, contrary to the other participants, your paper will face a very serious penalty regarding overwork limit. So remember that, okay? Hopefully you can write around 1,200 words to avoid the penalty for that, okay? But of course, once again, for those who only give me 800, 900 would not be a good practice at all again, okay? And for the 3 questions, we will return to this idea because this is your second week. We will go through the theories one by one, and then in the coming weeks, we will talk about different topics, and we will attempt to make a connection between some current affairs and these theories. I have to talk about this requirement because I don't want you to move on with an expectation you can write 5,000-6,000 words to get a good grade. Everyone wants to get a good grade, but you have to know that you have to do that within the boundary, okay? We have a very clear regulation in School of Geo. So as a tutor, I have to follow this practice because this essay would be reviewed by the other teachers and external examiners. So I have to give you a very friendly reminder regarding this, okay? But once again, don't worry because I think in the past few academic years, most of the participants could write around 1,200 words to present their idea in a significant way, okay? Okay. We have to move on to talk about some core ideas of topic 1, okay? To begin with, we will talk about some concepts central to sociology, and then we will go through certain examples to understand how different sociological perspectives have developed. We will also take a look of the history of sociology, and then we will explain why sociology emerged when it did. We will also talk about how can we to make a connection of sociology with the other domains. We'll also have a very brief review introductory session of the mentioned theories, okay? Structural functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism. But remember, once again, when we talk about sociology, when you take a note of academic paper, okay? When you take a note of these academic articles, you may find a little bit differences of the terms, which means that when we talk about functionalism, some people would talk about structural functionalism because they focus much more onto the structure, the difference of structure, the changes of structure. But some people would only focus on to the functional approach. It doesn't matter, just remember what I have mentioned before. Make it coherent, okay? Do not mix up these terms all together. When you start with a particular term, then use it until the end of your presentation and discussion and your essay, okay? Do not mix them up. I think we have just covered this idea, okay? Regarding how to prepare your academic paper. I would like to give you a example. You can take a note of this example. And obviously, this is not a very good practice. But remember that even we just talk about the second and the final paragraph are still a very poor practice. Okay, for those when you take a note of your turning report, a whole paragraph, a whole sentence have been highlighted, then you have to prepare to rephrase this sentence and ideas. Okay, remember that you are highly recommend to borrow ideas and take reference from academic articles, but you have to rephrase. You cannot just add a source in to make it at the so-called in-text citation have already offered. So this is not an issue of plagiarism. No, even you have add in-text citation, but you still have to make further changes of the sentence structure and to digest the ideas. Okay, you can imagine that when quite a number of the areas and ideas have been highlighted, but you would not go to rephrase these ideas. Consequently, you can make a guess regarding your own effort of these ideas. Hopefully you can get my point, which means that when you go to give me a paper, but maybe about 20% or a whole paragraph have been highlighted, okay? But you don't go to rephrase or make changes. Consequently, it will affect the originality of your ideas, which means that when we talk about the content, when we talk about language, structure, all of these aspects will face some penalty. Okay, so there are two ways you can try to run away with penalty. Okay, remember that. To begin with, write around 1,200 words. For example, 2,000 words will make you to downgrade from B+, for example, to C+. And then you have to remember to rephrase, okay? For most of the plagiarism likely essays would be asked to resubmit again. And with all of the resubmit will be could only be counted and could only be given a measurement of the way. So do not involve this kind of issues. Right? So we can see that try to prepare your essay as soon as possible and try to think about the structure. And once again, you have to attach your individual work declaration of academic integrity with your essay. You may have already heard that a week later, after week 4, something like that, after week 4, something like that, our class would be returned to the normal practice, okay, face-to-face mode. And even though the due day I remember would be the weekend, something like that, I will confirm you later, okay? Okay, we have to talk about the ideas of sociology. And to be with when we talk about sociology, okay? Oh, once again, as I mentioned, due to the copyright issues, and I often want to add animation, video, graphic images to get your to catch your attention. Therefore, my PowerPoint may look a little bit different with the version at Moodle, okay? But all of the core ideas have been added to that Moodle version, so don't worry about that. And okay, I have to move on. It can be a very different experience if you are traveling in a foreign country, moving in front of 1,000 people, okay? Imagine that. You may have trouble figuring out what is happening, okay? Is the crowd just the usual morning rush, or is it a political protest demonstration of some kind? In fact, we can take South Korea and North Korea as our example. Perhaps there was some sort of accident or disaster. It is safe in this crowd, or should you try to attract yourself? How can you find out what is going on? Although you are in it, you may not feel like you are part of this crowd. You may not know what to do or how to behave. Sociology wants to have an in-depth analysis of these kinds of stuff. Okay. For example, when we talk about the general practice between South Korea and North Korea, you may have already heard about the rationale behind. Okay. Very often, when you go to take a look of the video of the TV programs regarding the common practice of North Korea, quite a number of people often work together. They often gather together because the government of North Korea does not really trust the citizens at all. Therefore, often arrange and allocate of the general public, the citizens altogether, to urge them to take action altogether. The government does not want the citizen to walk away from the major groups. Okay, so you can see this reason behind. And you may still remember we mentioned about the general practice of Korea and Hong Kong. Okay, when we talk about sociology, an online definition is that sociology is the study of society. The notion of social science involving the study of our daily practice of people, groups, and societies. This is about the study of our behaviors as social beings, covering everything from the analysis of soft context. Okay. Here we are. We are now going to review a fundamental question for the present module. Why do you study sociology? Sociology allows you and me to look more objectively at our society and other societies. So as we mentioned, when we talk about sociology, we want to talk about sociology because we understand that when we take a look of the current practice, when we go to rethink our observations, we know that there's something very different. Okay, we can find out the difference, but we just don't know the reasons. What are the rationale behind the differences? So we want to talk about sociology because we believe sociology directs attention to how the parts of society fit together and change, and the consequence of that social change, which means that we want to take a look of the changes and the development of a society so that we can go to make further analysis of the changes. So once again, when we get back to the example of facial mask, you know that our society has changed all day, every day. Right from the beginning, in October, in November, something like that, the Hong Kong SL government start to urge legalize a new regulation regarding without any facial mask, okay, among the general public of different social groups. And even up to January, February, the senior management of our government, the senior officer, okay, we sit not to put on facial mask. But you know that nowadays we all have to put on our facial mask all day, every day. And this has become a core norm all over the world. So we can see that our society has changed all day, every day. But of course, we also have to talk about the reasons behind, okay? We understand it very well. Why did our government, without any supporting evidence, but still would like all of the population not to put on the mask? But of course, when we talk about this issue, may somehow, no matter how, may cannot avoid the involvement of politics. But the point is that we also have to talk about some issues, for example, like bureaucracy and the like. You can imagine why our government did not make a project for quite a number of different tragedy and social crisis, because when we take a look of the practice of the other region, like New Zealand, German, and even the United Kingdom, without any hesitation, they would go to make a very sincere apology. But when we talk about Hong Kong, you can think about the connection with Chinese culture, with the mainland China. Those people do not want to lose faith. Those people have a very serious burden, okay? So you can see, when we talk about sociology, we talk about the connection, and we want to take out this connection. When we talk about sociology, actually, we can base on some of our social phenomena to talk about that. For example, say suicide. Because there is such a large amount of people that exist in a society, one person alone committing suicide will not have any effect on society as a whole, okay? To begin with, without any intention to make a connection with the current affairs of Hong Kong, okay? This is just an example. Although one person committing suicide might affect certain people in the society they live in, for example, that person's employer will need to find someone to replace them, or their family member and loved one will be affected by that one person committing suicide. But when looking at society in general as a whole, they will not be affected by one person committing suicide. We believe that, okay? Because it seems that quite difficult for us to talk about a connection, to find out the so-called hints behind these people who have committed suicide. Now, however, if a significant or abnormal amount of people committed suicide, that might have an effect on society, which means that when you take a look of newspaper, actually, when for those who are the friends of SCMP, single, orientated, daily, and the like, very often they will not report this kind of cases, okay? And then you have no idea regarding how many people have passed away by committing suicide. But when we talk about some newspaper like Apple Daily, the Standard News, something like that, they will pay attention to this because they do concern about some situational development of our society. So we can see that, as we mentioned, different things can mean different people, can mean an object can mean different things to different people, okay? Which means that even we focus onto the same topic, issue of our society, we may have to find out the reason why, what are the reasons to make some people are affected by this issue, but not the other people, okay? So this is what we would like to talk about, the reason for us to talk about sociology. So what is sociology? Basically, it focuses primarily on the influence of social relations upon attitudes and behavior. For example, we take the USA as our example. The sociological perspective is important because it provides a different way of looking at familiar world. It allows you and me to have a new vision of social life. This perspective addresses the broader social context of behavior by looking at social location, employment, education, gender, races, and the like. We are able to see the link between what people do and the society setting that shape their behavior. When we talk about sociological approach, actually, the point is that we want to focus on certain elements, and then we believe that these elements may occupy a very important role to make changes for our society, okay? For example, in the second paragraph, we talk about some important elements like education, gender. In the coming week, we will talk about race, ethnic minority, we will talk about social class. In fact, we can make a connection between this issue with our practice in everyday life. For example, when we talk about education, education can be regarded as a very important issue, okay, which influence our life course. Or maybe we can get back to this after reviewing the theories. So all in all, what is sociology? A dictionary defines sociology as the systematic study of society. Okay, I quite like this term, systematic study. When we talk about systematic study, we also talk about social interaction, which means that when we talk about sociology, we talk about the action and reaction among different social groups and among different people. By our response, action, and reactions, we can observe some reasons, norms behind, okay? Imagine as we talk about the difference between South Korea and North Korea. You are one of the crowd. The society in which we live determines everything from the food we eat to the choice we make. A society of consists of people who under the same practice, boundary. But when we talk about the interaction among these people, we may have to talk about culture. As mentioned, some people, some region, and the citizens often want to gather together. to large extent may not really affected by their free will, but only, as mentioned, by the expectation of the government. You walk away from the crowds, you walk away from the group. Consequently, the government, some officer may approach you to give you some friendly reminder and the like. A society consists of people who share a territory, who interact with each other, and who share a culture. Culture is another very important element we have to pay attention, okay? We have to talk about the differences of culture. I'm not sure you remember it or not. In week 1, we talked about South Korea. We mentioned that whenever you go to travel around in South Korea, quite a number of the local people don't like to get in touch with Hong Kong people at all. You know that whenever we go to a restaurant or a fast food shop, we will go to order a hot water from the waiter or waitress because we would like to kill the virus by throwing our frog bonds to that glass of hot water. But when we talk about the mentality among the South Korea people, they do not like it at all. In their mind, they believe that freeze water can kill the virus. And they do value national resources. So when you go to order a hot water, obviously quite contradictory to their practice. That's one point. Another point is you go to waste that very valuable a cup of water to clean up your frog, your spawn, which means that you don't believe these final workers will go to clean them up. So we can see that when we talk about the best way for us to understand the difference of culture, traveling around obviously can be regarded as a very interesting method for us to talk about this. All in all, when we talk about the core idea of sociology, the point is that we want to do something to make further changes, to make adjustments to our life by developing objective knowledge, which means that by our observations, we can concern some social phenomena, and then we can go to deal with these issues effectively by our findings. So when we talk about the sociological perspective, very important perspective for you and me, because it provides a different way of looking at feminine world. It allows you and me to have a new vision towards this issue. So take a note of this animation, and the background is not MTNO Yunnan Station. The background is the opening session of Thanksgiving Festival from the USA. So once again, when we talk about observation, we have to understand what are the reasons behind and whether that is a common or uncommon practice. When we talk about the Thanksgiving Festival in the USA, actually, we cannot bring these people very much because when we talk about the practice of the entrepreneurial practice in the USA, they would only go to have such a big promotion during Thanksgiving period, okay? Just similar to the big sale from Japan on the 1st of January, okay? So once again, when you go to walk along or when you join this crowd of people, okay, you are one of the crowd, you know that you cheer when someone else that's in a concert. You yell alongside them, you move out of the way when someone needs to get by, and you say, excuse me, when you need to leave. Because you know you have to behave like this in this wider context. But the point is, why do you know? Why do you know that when you need to fly away from this kind of crowd, you have to make a product, you have to say sorry, you have to mention, excuse me, and the like. After the break, we will talk more about of the reasons behind this idea. Okay. Okay, before the break, we have just mentioned about, sorry, I have to input this. Okay, before we talk a break, we mentioned that when we talk about sociology, we refer to the observations by different elements of our society. So all in all, sociological approach is about systematic study of human society. Okay, by our observation, we can take a look of different social institutions. We also can take a look of the cultures around the world. We can imagine every aspect of self in relationship with others so that we can go to find out, to identify the elements among these relations. And yes, once again, remember when we talk about the terms in sociology, okay? When you take a note of the second paragraph, the first line, institutions, as we just mentioned, all of the different units of our society can be regarded as a social institution. But for some scholar, academic article, they view it as the so-called social agents, okay? So when we talk about the usage, the application of this term, okay, when you talk about the usage and application of these terms, remember that it would be okay for me, for your reader to view different forms, different usage of this term, but have to make it coherent, okay? Which means that when your paper talk about social agents, then maybe for the whole paragraph, for your whole essay, just talk about social agent, but not the first sentence talk about social agent, the second paragraph or sentence talk about social institutions. Then it would be a messy situation, okay? In fact, when we talk about sociology, we may have to return to the background of sociology, okay? Right from the beginning, we have to return to about 100 years, or about 200 years ago. At that moment, we have the role of industrial revolution, okay? At that moment, steam engine, water engine were transformed to some force power to move to speed up our production life, okay? Before that, actually, we had no idea regarding how to speed up or maximize productivities. Since then, however, we start to talk about production life as a bit like, because we thought that maybe it would be good for us to talk about how can we make the full use of human beings and machines and the like. At that moment, we can return to about 100 years ago. But remember that when we talk about the emergence of sociology, actually had a very tight connection with industrial revolution. When we talk about industrial revolution, actually, it came along with quite a number of significant changes to our society, okay? You may have already heard about this term before, Karl Marx, okay? When we talk about social class, when we talk about middle class, lower class, upper class, the elite, actually, these terms, these ideas came from that moment when we talk about the emergence of Industrial Revolution could be regarded as the beginning of sociology. Of course, before that, we have different kind of layout. We have different kind of practice to talk about how to make sociological analysis. But when we talk about systematic research and analysis of our societies, we may have to get back to that moment. You can imagine that, okay? Imagine quite a number of the foreign workers from France, they return to the city. They ran to the factories to work. However, all of those major cities, the best cities, did not prepare enough to get in touch with such a significant amount of workers. Consequently, we can imagine the different conditions. We can imagine the other situations among these foreign workers. They did not have a very keen working and living environment. And because such a significant amount of foreign workers have come to the big city, they don't have to think about the insufficient manpower, okay? And therefore, the business class, they didn't have to think about how to change the benefits, how to attract these people to work for them because too many people are available in the market. So we can imagine the consequence of that changes. Quite a number of these people, they had to undergo a very painful journey, okay? A very unclean, untidy working and living environment. And people start to think about whether we could go to do something to make changes. At that moment, we start to have the formation of labor union. We start to have some civil conflict between working class and the middle class and the upper class. And these people treated with the government altogether. But nowadays, when we talk about the differences between the time, we are now in the so-called Industrial Revolution 3.0. Contrary to the Industrial Revolution 1.0 and Industrial Revolution 2.0, for the moment, the current version has a very different practice. We had integrate most of the work with computer, automation, and the like. All of this idea helped you and me to know that we don't need so many people to work in factory. And more people may have to undergo retraining again and again because they may have to face the upskilling situation, which means that when we talk about 10 or 20 years ago, we have Walkman, Discman, okay? Nowadays, how many people know this item very well, and how many people know the rate to maintain, to repair these items are questionable. So we can see that when someone has not been trained how to repair a Walkman or a Discman, nowadays, actually, we don't have a suitable position for this person. So when we talk about Industrial 3.0, obviously has brought quite a significant upside down situation to our society. And therefore, when we talk about such a big change, okay, you can imagine when we talk about sociology, we talk about connection, okay? Do you remember that? We talk about connection, ma. So when we talk about sociology, when we talk about the changes, the upside down situation coming from the current industrial revolution 3.0, actually you can make connection with the other aspect of society. For example, education. In the past, to be frank, most of the people, the majority of the people, do not have to talk about further study, okay? They didn't have to talk about life up for a master degree or even a doctoral degree. But nowadays, it seems that undergraduate, your bachelor degree is a must, okay? A ticket for you to enter the labor market. But you also have to pay attention to master degree or a professional diploma qualification. This is because we have to prepare for the changes under the current industrial revolution 3.0. But the point is that we now have to move on to the so-called industrial revolution 4.0. So you can imagine that when we talk about sociology, we talk about the connection between our human being and the wider context. So in the near future, we can imagine that we cannot just satisfy with a master's degree. We may have to prepare. We have to know how to use, how can we make the full use of the innovative technology, okay? For example, we have to talk about not only knowing how to use technology, Excel, PowerPoint, and the like. We have to talk about how can we to communicate with people all over the world, or how can we to make the full use of computer, and whether we can make my computer to communicate with another computer or another side of the world. So you can see, when we talk about the wider context, to a large extent have changed our daily practice and understanding to our society. Okay. When we talk about sociology, okay, that is about systematic understanding and the knowledge of the wider context. But in fact, when we talk about the emergence of sociology, actually, once again, as we mentioned, it came up with the ideas with the new situation, industrial revolution. But the point is that, why did the people at that moment start to talk about sociology? But remember that when we talk about sociology, not really just the so-called unique domain, okay? Very often when we talk about sociology, we may have to make connection with psychology, economic, political science, and the like, okay? For example, why do we have to talk about psychology when we talk about sociology? Because it seems that the two subjects are not really interrelated. But in fact, to be frank, they are interrelated. For example, when we talk about sociology, we get back to the situational development of industrial revolution. More and more people start to find their job in a factory. Consequently, we may have to think about how to manage such an amount of laborers, and how can we to do something to make them feel comfortable with their routinized schedule. You may have already heard about that before, or when you go to take a look from the internet regarding, for example, you can input Foxconn, iPhone factory. All of the frontline workers, up to persons, in factories are still stick with some very routinized schedule procedures. So how can we help these frontline workers to avoid feeling annoying from these very routinized procedures? We may have to think about some alternative solution or way out. For example, psychology can be regarded as a good solution. They may have to think about how can we make this frontline worker feel much more comfortable. Even we could not go to make a very significant changes. For example, we still have to make them to stay in a factory to work for 12 hours, okay? But how can we to make them feel comfortable to work for a factory with 12 hours but not feel annoying? We may have to do something, for example, based on the finding of psychology. You may have already heard about this before regarding the so-called scientific management. 100 years ago, some people thought that maybe we can refer to the promotion of psychological arrangement. For example, we can give them a break, maybe per 2 hours, per 1 hour, something like that, to make them feel comfortable to stick with these standardized procedures. But when we talk about psychology, actually, they also refer to the observation to make further changes. Okay, they will not tell you just focus on to this new practice. Every 3 hours, give them a 5 minutes break, then it will be good enough. We can stick with this arrangement for in the coming decades. No, not true at all. When we talk about psychology, they would go to review the findings and the practice among these frontline workers. Very often, you can imagine that when this frontline worker used to take a 5 minutes break per 3 hours, consequently, a week later, they may start to feel annoying again. So, according to psychology, okay, by an experiment, it would be good to give them a break per 1 hour on Monday, per two hour on Tuesday, something like that, so that they don't feel just like the same and make them feel more energetic, because every day they have to face a new situation, new challenge, and the like. So you can see when we talk about psychology, and actually to a large extent can be regarded as one of the sub-domain under sociology. Okay. When we talk about sociology, very often people would go to talk about sociology research. Okay. For those who often focus on to the data, factual information, we call this approach as the so-called quantitative sociology. For those who often focus on to focus group, in-depth interviews and the like, we call this practice as the so-called quantitative sociology. Okay. In fact, when we talk about sociology, it has a very long-standing record. Okay, as mentioned, even before Industrial Revolution, we had the emergence of sociology, but until the emergence of Industrial Revolution, we start to think about the connection between some social phenomena and our practice, especially when we talk about the upside down changes after Industrial Revolution. So people start to talk about social reform And then they also start to talk about social mobility, something like that. No one wants to stay with the same station for an whole time life. And therefore, at that moment, we could see quite a number of conflict emerging. So before we move on, I would like to take a note of this video. It can maybe we just some move on a little bit to take a note of the three synthetic theories first, okay? Because I would like to give you have sufficient time to raise a question at will. When we talk about the core ideas, the core theories of this module, we have to focus on the following perspective: functionalist, conflict, and symbolic interactionism. Okay, to begin with, I would like to talk about functional approach. Okay, functional approach. And actually here, please take note of these videos first.
Functionalism is a system of thinking based on the ideas of Emil Durkheim that looks at society from a large-scale perspective. It examines the necessary structures that make up a society and how each part helps to keep the society stable. According to functionalism, society is heading toward an equilibrium. I know it sounds a bit strange that a society can be at equilibrium, but consider the changes many businesses have had to make in response to companies like Amazon. Local businesses must adapt to find a new way to cater to customers in order to restore the balance. In the theory of functionalism, society is made from a bunch of connected structures. One structure is institutions, which are structures that meet the needs of the society, like education systems, financial institutions, businesses, marriage, laws, mass media, non-governmental organizations, medicine, religion, the military, police forces, and lots of others too. Another structure is what Durkheim called social facts. Social facts are ways of thinking and acting formed by the society that existed before any one individual and will still exist after any individual is dead. They are unique objects that cannot be influenced by an individual. They have a coercive effect over the individual that is usually only noticed when we resist against them. So, for example, one social fact is the law. It is always there, but we don't notice it until we try and break it or act against it. Some other examples are moral regulations, religious faiths, and social currents like suicide or birth rate. You might wonder how suicide can be a social fact. Well, one person committing suicide has no effect on the presence of suicide in the society. Social facts are a facet of the society itself, and, according to Durkheim, are a necessary structure. But society is more than just the sum of its parts. It is dependent on the structures that create it, just like a cell is dependent on all the little parts that make it up. Every part of the cell has a specific vital function that depends on other parts of the cell. Without everything working together smoothly, the cell would die. The same is true of a society. Every structure has a function that meets a need of the society, and all the structures work together to maintain a social equilibrium. So, for example, you have schools, which educate students so they can find good jobs and support the community. And businesses provide specialized services, and laws maintain social order. These recognized and intended consequences of institutions are known as manifest functions. But sometimes the institutions have unintended consequences. Schools allow the students and professors to make social connections, and they expose the students to new activities through extracurriculars. Businesses connect people across societies. These unrecognized and unintended consequences are called latent functions and are often indirect effects of the institution. Now, Durkheim's main question was, what holds a society together? How can it remain relatively stable even as traditions disappear and customs change? He thought that small societies were held together by their similarities, and the individual was self-sufficient, But that only works for small societies, and we all know societies change and grow large. The small society would eventually evolve into a large society where the individual was interdependent on others. But what causes this evolution of society to occur? The most basic factor is population growth within a limited space. Suddenly, there isn't enough land for everyone to own their own farm and feed themselves. So just a few farmers grow enough food for the entire community. But now the farmers don't have enough time for other necessities like making clothes or teaching their kids. The people who no longer have to grow food now take on different roles like tailoring or education, and everyone becomes dependent on one another for their continued well-being. People have become specialized, which forces mutual interdependence. This interdependence helps to ensure that the community won't fall apart. Now that people depend on each other for the production of goods and services, there is a need for a method of distribution and a way to control and coordinate that production and distribution. In functionalism, a change to either production, distribution, or coordination will force the others to adapt in order to maintain a stable state society. Social change is annoying and upsets the equilibrium and threatens the mutual interdependence of the people within that society. The institutions and structures of the society adapt only just enough to compensate for a change and maintain the stability of mutual interdependence. Phew, alright, that just about covers it. While functionalism is a nice way to look at society with its equilibrium of institutions all filling the needs of the society they create, there are some serious problems here. Functionalism focuses completely on the institution with little regard for the importance of the individual. The individual is acknowledged, but nothing they do really affects the structures of society. Functionalism is also largely unable to explain social change and conflict. We know it happens, but functionalism is so focused on maintaining the equilibrium of the society that little significant change is modeled and no conflict can occur. The structures of a society adapt only just enough to find the stability again. Right, so while there's more to understanding a society than just looking at the stable state of its parts, functionalism is helpful in understanding the workings of society by examining the functions of its integral structures.
Okay, when we talk about the core ideas of the functional approach, actually we may have to talk about the connections, the relations among different social agents. Okay. For example, from the video, it seems that it would be good to talk about functional approach because it really can interpret the functions and the roles of different social organizations. Let's say, okay, for example, when we talk about schooling, when we talk about hospital, when we talk about government, all of them do have their roles and stages. But the point is that you can imagine, in general speaking, every one of these social agents might have an individual role. But what as if a social agent has been affected by another one? Whether that social agent is still could be regarded as an individual agent. For example, it would be good to talk about the importance of education, the importance of schooling, because we have to rely on the daily routine, systematic training to let the children, the students, have some ideas regarding the norms, okay, 规範 and ORM norms. So it would be good to let schooling, primary school, secondary school, and even kindergarten to teach you and me some fundamental understanding to rush the norms, to rush the manners, okay? So that how can we behave well in front of the senior citizens? How we may have to greet the teachers, something like that. But what as if a social agent has been affected by another one? For example, suppose we don't have to talk about politics in primary school, secondary school, and university because they do have their own roles, responsibility. So, but when we talk about the current practice in Hong Kong, for example, primary school have quite a number of primary schools have already started to talk about national security. And when we talk about secondary school, it seems that in the near future, they may have to arrange some field work for their students. The student may have to return to the mainland China to learn for a whole week or a couple of weeks, something like that. In universities, suppose a platform for you and me to learn how to develop our logic, how to make sense with the society so that we can, based on our training, to enhance our critical thinking and logic by different projects, by the study of different undergraduate modules. But the point is that nowadays we can see the intervention between the education bureau and universities. So when we talk about these ideas, theoretically, every agent does has individual role, and but of course we also have to talk about the connection. Okay, for example, when we talk about hospital and police service department, although we would view this as individual agent, but they may have some kinds of cooperation to a certain extent. Okay, for example, when a very sick person who has been confirmed with COVID-19 pandemic, and he has stolen out from the hospital, so we may have to approach the police service department to find out this person. So we can see that when we talk about functional approach, we start with the discussion of individual agents of our society, but we also have to talk about the connection among different social agents. Okay. So very often when we talk about functional approach, we talk about macro perspective, which means that we want to talk about a real regarding the function of our society, because we view our society as a whole. Okay, and then we view different agents as one of the parts of our social system, just like our organs. Okay, so functional approach is a framework for building theory which views society as a complex system, and the parts work together to promote a very solid way out for us to talk about sustainability. It asserts that our lives are guided by social structures, okay, relatively stable patterns of social behavior. Each social structure has social functions or consequence for the operation of society as a whole. So far so good. So once again, we could view our societies at different parts. Okay, for example, we have family. Family that has particular role. We start to learn about the norm, the manner, some behavior, some standardized behavior from family. But of course, quite a number of family now, they have rely on kindergarten, preschool to talk about this engagement. We have religion. Religion to a certain extent also influence our behavior. Okay. So when we talk about functional approach, okay, we want to talk about the whole picture for our society. And then we want to talk about maybe we have to pay attention to the conflict between different agents when we cannot have a balance among different agents. Consequently, we may have the rise of conflict. So when we talk about the core ideas of functional approach, okay, you know that when we talk about functional approach, which means that we try to make connection and then try to interpret the roles of these different agents. So we may have to move on to talk about macro perspective. And from this perspective, similar to functional approach, we view our society as a whole, but we pay attention to the details of conflict. Okay.
Conflict theory is a way of studying society that focuses on the inequalities of different groups in a society. It is based on the ideas of Karl Marx from the 19th century, who believed a society evolved through several stages, the most important of which were feudalism, capitalism, and finally socialism. 19th century Europe was a capitalist society, where the rich upper class, called the bourgeoisie, were a minority of the population, and the poor lower class, called the proletariat, were the majority. Now you might think that the majority would have more sway over the society, but it was actually the bourgeoisie that had the power. They owned the factories that produced everything people needed, and they sold what they produced to earn a living. The proletariat only had their labor to sell to make a living, and they were dependent on the factory owners to get paid. But this wasn't just a one-sided dependence. The factory owners were also dependent on the workers to work in the factories, though they would never admit it because they would lose some of their power. There was a significant economic inequality between the factory owners and the workers. It was this economic inequality that Marx believed would fuel a change in society. As the working class realized they were being exploited, they would unite to create a class consciousness. This class consciousness is kind of like getting everyone on the same wavelength so they can be stronger and overthrow the capitalist status quo. Marx created a model which proposed that a society where one group exploited another group economically would actually contain the seeds of its own destruction. The existing generally accepted state, or thesis, of a society would cause the formation of a reaction, or antithesis, that opposed the accepted state. In a capitalist society, the accepted thesis was that the bourgeoisie ran the factories, while the working class provided the labor. The desire of the working class to change the way things were was the antithesis. The thesis and antithesis can't exist together peacefully. One side is quite happy with the status quo and wants to leave things the way they are. The other side is looking for change because they really aren't so happy with the current state of things. The struggle between the two sides would eventually lead to a compromise, or a synthesis of the two, resolving the tension between them by creating a new state. Perhaps the synthesis here is that members of the working class begin to take on managerial positions. The few workers who become managers might create a new middle class that has even more power than the factory owners themselves. This synthesis of thesis and antithesis would eventually become a new thesis in its own right, and begin the process of creating its opposite once again. Perhaps the new middle class has become so powerful that the factory owners begin to feel threatened. The middle class is quite happy with their newfound status, but the bourgeoisie doesn't want to share. The strong influence of the middle class over everyone else has become the new thesis, and the bourgeoisie wants that to change, creating an antithesis. But maybe the bourgeoisie doesn't feel threatened, and instead, the workers are resentful of their former friends and their new power. Now, the workers want the status quo to change. The antithesis can arise from any source of unrest to oppose the thesis. Even after this struggle is settled, there would eventually be unrest again, and an antithesis would spring from that new source of unrest and tension. The idea of two opposing sides has come up many times through history. W.E.B. Du Bois was very influential in the struggle of African Americans for equal rights, and the women's suffrage movement created tension and eventually changed society. Each of these conflicts between the status quo and its opposition resolved into a new thesis, which just waited for the next source of tension to come along. Conflict theory does a wonderful job of modeling the often drastic changes that occur in a society, but it doesn't take into account the stability that a society can experience, and it doesn't explain how a society is held together, and it really doesn't like the status quo. There is much to be said for the application of conflict theory, and much that it leaves unanswered. All in all, it's another tool in our belt to understand the complexities of the society we live in.
To a large extent, when we talk about conflict theory, actually, we can make connection with functional approach, which means that we have just mentioned when we talk about functional approach, which means that every social unit that has a particular role and connection with the other. You can imagine when the connection among different social agents has broken, okay? Or when one of the social agents has expanded too much bigger than the rest. Consequently, we may have to face some problem, the rise of conflicts, for example, which means that suppose police service department, fire service department, hospital authority, all of them do have their particular role, and no one should be regarded as a dominant one, but without any intention to offend, okay? When you take a look of the current practice, it seems that somehow, no matter how, the power and the influence from police service department and the resources from it, the usage of resources from police service department are much influential than the rest. Then for long term, we can preview the rise of conflict, okay? For long term, we can preview the rise of conflict. So when we talk about conflict theory, which means that we may have the rise of, we may have the development of unbalanced situation. Consequently, we have the rise of conflict. Conflict is something that is inevitable and can be, nevertheless, can be beneficial, okay? And for example, when we talk about the conflict, nowadays we talk about BLM, Black Lives Matter, and obviously, because we have the rise of ethnic or racial issues, and therefore more and more people pay attention to their rights and their situation. So to a large extent, when we talk about conflict, could not be viewed as a poor practice. To a certain extent, it can be regarded as an opportunity for us to move forward, okay? So the social conflict approach is a framework for building theory which views society as an area of inequality, generating conflict and change. Most of the experts from sociology, favor this approach attempt not only to understand society, but also to reduce social inequality, which means that when we can allocate, when we can identify the unfair area in equality, consequently, we can go to make further changes to talk about the betterment of this situation. Okay. Just as structural functional approach, when we talk about society, when we talk about the practice of society, actually, we should not just talk about social exclusion. We may also have to talk about social inclusion, which means that in the past, 100 years ago, we exclude the back from the major society. We ask them not to come to the major companies to work. But nowadays, you know that when we talk about a balance of society, obviously, we have much less conflict than ever. Okay. Finally, I would like to talk about symbolic interruptionism. Today should be a very busy day for you because we have a number of videos, but I would like to give you an introductory session regarding all of the theories before the actual period. So I would like to take a note of this final video with you together. Okay.
Symbolic interactionism takes a small-scale view of society. It focuses on the small-scale perspective of the interactions between individuals, like when you hang out with a friend, instead of looking at large-scale structures like education or law. By looking at the small scale, symbolic interactionism explains the individual in a society and their interactions with others, and through that, it can explain social order and change. The theory was compiled from the teachings of George Herbert Mead in the early 20th century. He believed that the development of the individual was a social process, as were the meanings individuals assigned to things. People change based on their interactions with objects, events, ideas, other people, and they assign meaning to things in order to decide how to act. For example, if I had sat under the shade of trees all my life, and I was on a long walk today and spotted a big tree, I might want to sit under it. The tree means shade on a hot day to me. Herbert Bloomer continued Mead's work and actually coined the term symbolic interactionism to describe this theory of society. He proposed 3 tenets to explain symbolic interactionism. Let's say I do decide to sit under that tree on my long walk today. I step off the path and sit down and lean back against the trunk. Bloomer's first tenet was that we act based on the meaning we have given something. I consider the tree as a place to rest, so I'll go lean against it. As I'm sitting there, another person stops to warn me that all trees are infested with ants. Bloomer's second tenet was that we give meaning to things based on our social interactions. The same thing can have a different meaning for different people. For the person talking to me, the tree is a breeding ground for creepy crawlies, and they are going to avoid it. But I'm quite happy with my seat in the shade, and I haven't been bothered by any ants, so I'm content just to sit. We have different views of the tree, and so we act differently. As I'm sitting there talking to this lovely person, I feel something tickle my shoulder, and suddenly I jump up as something bites my back. Turns out the tree was infested with ants. Now that I have been bitten under a tree, I might not sit under the next one I find because it might also be infested with ants. Bloomer's third tenet was that the meaning we give something is not permanent. It can change due to everyday life. The meaning I give to trees has changed after my interaction with the infested tree. A big tree now means shade on a hot day with a potential for getting bit. So let's sum up the 3 central ideas of symbolic interactionism. They are that action depends on meaning, that different people assign different meanings to things, and that the meaning of something can change. But there are some criticisms to symbolic interactionism as a theory, because it doesn't ask the same questions as the large-scale sociology theories do. It is sometimes considered as supplemental rather than a full theory, because it is restricted to studying small interactions between individuals. While this is true, symbolic interactionism gives a different perspective to sociology that is necessary for fully understanding a society. It is capable of explaining how aspects of society can change as they are created and recreated by social interactions. It examines society on a small scale and gives the individual the same importance as the society as a whole, and is a necessary view when studying a society.
Okay, okay. The video has mentioned a very important point. An object can mean different things to different people, but you may still remember that we have just mentioned again and again. We also have to pay attention to the differences of time, regions, and culture, okay? Which means that when we talk about an object, the implication, the meaning of an object, we also can have to pay attention to the differences of the background, okay? The differences of culture will influence the meaning, the differences of time will influence our practice and understanding of it, okay? So when we talk about symbolic interactionism, actually, contrary to the functional approach and conflict approach, this is another aspect. We pay attention to the details. So for long, people view this as the so-called micro perspective, which means that we focus on to the details, the relations among different factors and elements to talk about the influence of some social issues, okay? So the symbolic interaction approach is a framework for building theory which view society as the product of the everyday interaction of individuals. The social, functional, and the social conflict approach talk about a macro level orientation, meaning that they focus on broad social structures which influence society as a whole. All in all, symbolic interactionism has a micro level of orientation. It focuses on patterns of social interaction in particular setting, okay? To be fair, we can see interaction and meaning essential to society and assumes that meanings are not inherent, but rather are created by interaction, which means that when we talk about meaning, actually, our parents, grandparents will give you and me some story regarding the meaning of a stuff, but we know the new meaning or the implication of that by our understanding and observation, okay? So when we talk to a friend, an observer can easily give an objective report of the work we have said, but our friends respond, we will depend on the list of words we spoke, but our friends' interpretation of the entire interaction and our friends' response is at the same line, influencing what we are saying, which means that we have to talk about the action and reaction process, okay? Just similar to your dialogues, the dialogue between you and your parents, grandparents, would be quite different with your dialogue among your learning groups, okay? So when we talk about symbolic ideas, actually, we can refer to science, symbols, language, gesture, and the like. So we would get back to this idea later, but today we have to give you some introductory session regarding this theories. Okay, a very brief one of today. So today we, based on the fundamental understanding of sociology in week 1, and then we have further analysis regarding some core idea and the historical development of sociology. We know that by the emergence of Industrial Revolution 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and the latest 4.0, all of these practices have influenced our daily lives. And we have to make further changes. For example, in the past, we don't have to talk about further study. Nowadays, a bachelor from university is a must, and then many people have to talk about postgraduate study. And we cover the ideas of the theories, okay? But remember that all of these theories are interrelated, so we would not just focus on the one and the only one. We also spare some time to talk about your assignment, okay? And especially we focus on to the second item, reflective essay. Once again, only choose one topic, only choose one question out of the 3 questions. You don't, and you cannot give me all of the 3 questions together, okay? You only have to do one question. And remember, 1,200 words. When everyone only finish their essay within 1,200 words, for those who write more than that boundary may have to face penalty. Remember that. This is about academic judgment and your effort. When other people pay attention and make the full use, prepare a good outline to present his idea by 1,200 words. But some people spend 2,000 words to begin with. You have 60%, 2/3 of the work, much more than the other students. Not a very fair practice, and therefore a full grade deduction would be unavailable. And then it also influences the understanding, the appreciation from your reader marker, okay? So remember that this is a very important reminder for you in week 2. And I'm almost going to end this session. And for the rest, I would like to talk about the reflective notes. And we have already introduced reflective notes 1 in the last lesson. Here is the background, and you have to answer the question. And here we have just released the second one. The background is here. National security law is a new controversial topic in Hong Kong in June 2020. Zhang Xiaoming pointed out that identifying Hong Kong's problem as political rather than economic, and national security law would target only few people who committing crimes. Okay. Question: how do you view the importance of national security? Do you think Hong Kong citizens have the responsibility to maintain it? How do you relate this question to one country, 2 systems? To begin with, when we talk about reflective notes, remember that not academic writing, only 200 words for you to express your opinion at will by your gut feeling. No in-text citation, no reference list, no academic terms, just similar to your daily chit chat with your friends by WhatsApp, by Facebook, by Instagram, okay? The design of these items aim to give me a chance to give you some marks, okay, to contribute to help you to have the so-called contribution. But the point is that this can be regarded as a chance for you to have some intensive training for your logic and critical thinking. As I mentioned again and again, in the coming week, in the coming future, in the near future, you may have a chance for interview regarding scholarship, a new position, something like that. The interviewer would not go to ask you formula, equation from your academic program, but then would go to make a connection with current affairs. So all of the reflective loss would relate to current affairs. We may get back to this reflective loss and have discussion in a later stage, but for the moment, just be yourself to answer the question by your gut feeling, okay? No academic terms, no reference, no in-text citation. Just view it as a free writing, like your everyday chit-chat by WhatsApp, Facebook, and Instagrams, and the like, okay? So this is your second reflective loss. So this is almost the end of your second session, and I will stay behind to answer your question. So please feel free to raise your question if necessary. For the coming week, we will also have this kind of practice, which means that to spare certain time for you to raise questions regarding the content, or for you to raise any idea regarding some of the weekly exercise. So the second weekly exercise is the reflective loss, okay, what we have just mentioned. Okay, someone want me to displace the reflective loss question again. Here you are, but actually all of these questions have already created to your Moodle platform, okay? Please go to Moodle to take a look of this reflective loss. You have to submit your feedback, okay? You have to give me 200 words by that connection bot. So once again, 200 words only. Don't go to copy and paste newspaper, something like that. Just give me your free will. Just give me your gut feeling regarding that, okay? And regarding the core idea of whether you would like to talk about the position, okay? You are talking about the question 2, I suppose, Hong Kong citizen, and I may have to take a note of your question. Note 1, can you Hong Kong decision, not my decision. Regarding the nature of question 1, okay, actually, the core ideas is not about your decision or consideration. The core ideas is about the influence of family, peer, your buddies, or co-worker, colleagues, or social media like Facebook, Instagram. For example, the news, the Standard News, Apple News, something like that. In what way influence your decision or consideration? Which means that you often feel very comfortable with the current affair with our society, but the social media has mentioned so many negative or some very controversial news or arguments. So you have started to rethink your role, and you may start to join much more demonstrations than before, something like that. Okay. So the point is that it's not only about your decision, not about the rationale of your decision, but about your understanding of the role of a family, peer, or social media. In what ways affect your ideas, your actions. Okay. Hopefully, I can answer your question, which means that about the influence of this elements. Okay. So my example is here. For example, my family is very old school. They don't want me to join any political actions or talk about politics. Never have I joined demonstration then, something like that. Which means that when we talk about whether I would like to talk about my involvement, my my civic engagement. Civic engagement refers to whether you would go to give a role in election, whether you would go to join a demonstration, whether you would go to sign up agreement, something like that. I am feared that I cannot put it in here because very long. It involves 100 words, something like that. Okay, but okay, if you like, it doesn't matter. But somehow you still have to log into Moodle and submit it. I just don't know the reason at all. Anyway. As you can see, this is a very quick way to copy and paste question in here, but it doesn't matter, just as you like. But I think only this way because it would quite disturb the other participants. Okay, please wait me for a while. I would take a look and to add you to Moodle very soon. Okay. Okay, for the latecomer, don't worry about that because I have just received the update student list from in the afternoon, so I didn't have sufficient time to do so. I would add you to the Moodle as soon as possible. Okay, don't worry about that. For Ms. Wong, will you please remember to submit your homework to turn it in by Moodle, okay? Hopefully you won't go to submit your feedback in here, okay? This also have to talk about the privacy, okay? May I warn Mr. Wong Hilson, you has just add this module in the afternoon or the morning of today because I have not received, I have not seen your information from the list. Yes. Oh, I have because the student list which I have just received in the afternoon has not seen your information, your student ID, and are you sure you are attending this evening class instead of the day class? Because I have two different time slots for this module. Evening class, okay. So I would go to confirm this because I don't want to add you to the wrong time slot. Okay, that's fine then. Okay. Thanks for your response. Okay. For the rest, remember once again, just prepare reflective notes by your gut feeling. Okay, do not make it this academic writing. Okay. Okay, you have already in Moodle class. This quite strange. Anyway, because you know they do have some lacking when we talk about the procedure from registry. So, okay. I have downloaded all of these notes, but I haven't marked them all. In fact, all of you have been given about 1 week about more than 1 week. Just view it as a 1 week for you to prepare your reflective notes. Okay. For example, for reflective notes, for your second reflective note, the due date would be the next weekend, something like that. Okay. When is the due to give you a view to question of the question? Oh, again, when we talk about the due date, about 1 week, but actually I have set it more than a week. For example, for the second reflective notes, we have just mentioned in this evening, the due date would be the 3rd of October. Okay, so more than 1 week. Just view it as a 1 week so that much more easy for you to remember that. Okay, just about 1 week. Okay, thank you.
Today's friend, Mariah.
好啦，再見啦各位，咁啊下星期再見，好，拜拜，多謝大家。